Cool. Looks like we've got a cozy little session today. So let's just get this started. Yeah, thank you and welcome to my talk about Starship Home and how we at Creature have built this crazy, quirky 4-hour narrative adventure game that takes place fully in mixed reality. I'm Mark Schramm. I'm the Director of Engineering at Creature. I've worked on many games in the past. I've been in the industry pretty much since the early Oculus Rift DK1 days. I've shipped my own games that you might have never heard of. I've shipped Super Hot VR, a game you probably have heard of. I've worked on Laser Dance, a game that you will probably hear of in a few months. And I'm working on Starship Home, a game that you're probably hearing of right now. On Starship Home, I was doing many things. I was the Director of Engineering. I wrote the story, did some of the gameplay design. And to keep within that spirit, this talk is also going to be a little bit about programming, about narrative design, about gameplay design, but overall, essentially, how do you do a good mixed reality game? So it's a bit of a post-mortem, but also with enough information that will help you build your own mixed reality game. If you haven't played Starship Home is a 4-hour narrative experience. There should be some audio on this. Yeah, there's some audio on this. And yeah, so it's a 4-hour narrative experience. It's fully in mixed reality. The player gets delivered a box of Starship components. They build their own Starship. They take off, explore the stars. They travel to other planets. They collect alien plants. Then they enter the dreams of those plants to heal their inner trauma. After they grow and take care of the plants start singing a song. And out of those plants, they assemble an intergalactic orchestra to heal the universe. You know, the usual stuff. But jokes aside, we're a happy little plant game, and our story is about climate change, which leads to an important question. Why choose mixed reality to tell this story? Or why make a mixed reality game in the first place? And the answer to that question is embodiment. Or to be more precise, the lack thereof. I'm going to explain it on an example here. On the left, we have Maestro, which is a game where you play as an orchestra conductor. And on the right, there's a still from our Starship Home live action trailer. And in VR, which Maestro is, you're playing another character. In VR, it lends itself to being someone else. You're an orchestra conductor, you're a super spy, or an astronaut, or a soldier. Whereas in mixed reality, it is hard to be anything but yourself. Like you look down, you see your sneakers, you look around, you see your messy living room. It is hard to immerse you, and it's hard to sell that immersion that you're actually someone else. Rather than seeing that as a limitation, we wanted to use that as a tool to tell a very personal story. A story where you, as yourself, can enact change on a virtual world, and then hopefully you can realize that you can enact that same change in the real world. Not only is there a different perspective in mixed reality than to VR, it's also just the lack of control we have over the player's environment or what they see. On the left is a screenshot from Light Brigade. It's sort of like a roguelite shooter. And on the right, again, still from Starship Home. And I just love that comparison where on the one hand, on the left side, you see someone holding a gun. And that's sort of what we give the player, what they can do in that world. And on the right-hand side, in Starship Home, you can just like set up your space and then just chill on the couch for a while. And that one was really hard for us because in VR we get total control over what the player can see, what they can do, where they can go. We can create the world for them. Anything they can see, anything they can hear, we control. In mixed reality, we're competing against the real world. But more importantly, there's also different expectation when you play mixed reality games. In VR, you want to be totally immersed. You are probably playing mixed reality games because you can't afford to be fully immersed in something. Maybe your living room is a clutter and you don't have the space to set up a full, 2x2, 3x3 meter VR space. Or maybe you're, want to make sure that you don't stepping on a dog or a kid on the floor or something like that, right? So in mixed reality, you want the environmental awareness. And because the player has that expectation of having environmental awareness, there's also something that we cannot do. We can never intrude on that promise that you'll be able to see your space. In short, we can't intrude. And I have an example of this. This is my, at this point, she was like 3 years old. That's my daughter, River. And she was testing, she was like the main tester of our game. As a side note, I always thought that, if my toddler can play a game mechanic and has no issues with it, like no other player should have an issue with it. That turned out not to be true. She's so much better than every other player that we've ever had a playtest with. I think mostly because she has no preconceived notion of what a game should be, so she just has fun with it and she figures out all the things very easily. But the thing is, so she's been playing this game every day for like an hour. Like every new thing that came into this game, she played and she had great fun. But one day we introduced a new character. This character is our robot Ella. She's not in the final game, and I will explain why. One day we added her, and when I gave River the headset, she wanted to play with it. She saw the robot and she froze. She was terrified. Suddenly, there was an entity in her living room. There was an entity in her game. The game that she's been playing for half a year at this point, enjoyed, suddenly someone was there and she was startled by Ella, even though she looked friendly, even though has very soft shapes and looks friendly. She had like this weird flopping idle animation, but like she wasn't threatening, but River was scared. That's when we realized, like, oh, this is her living room, this is River's living room, and we gave her something that scared her. On a fundamental, on an almost primal level, it scared her. Now, at this point, we were still very invested in Ella, so we did a little experiment. My wife was in the room at the time, and she saw that as well. So she kind of pretended to be Ella. So she spoke like in a little robot voice. And so my wife was just pretending to be Ella. And because my daughter was 3, she's easily fooled. So as Ella, we essentially talked to River saying, it's like, hey, I'm Ella, I'm robot, I'm your friend. And then River started warming up to the robot. And like soon after, they became almost best friends. Like River tried to grab her hands, she wanted to dance with her, she wanted to lead her around the room to show her all the plants that she's been watering. And then she started talking to Ella. And as a side note, if you have kids, and you probably know that at some point when they grow up, they realize that they have control over their own mouth. And in the very beginning, they keep telling you everything. But then once they realize that they can withhold information, they will withhold information. So there was this phase when River was 3 years old where she didn't tell us things anymore because she realized she doesn't have to. So when we asked her about how childcare was, she's like, it's fine. I was like, oh, what did you do? Nothing. It's like a bunch of stuff like this. But then as Ella, we asked her the same questions, and slightly unethical, but she gave us all of the answers. So we kept asking her, like, oh, who's your favorite friend? Or it's like, who do you play with? What's your favorite food? All of the things that she wouldn't tell us, she gave us an answer. Or she gave Ella the answer. We asked her, it's like, oh, who do you play with in childcare? We asked her, which parent do you like more, mommy or daddy? As a side note, you should never ask questions you're not prepared to hear the answer to. In any case, what we've stumbled upon is that if we add a character to a game or anything into your space, really, it can scare you. It can scare the living crap out of you. Or it can be your best friend that you want to spend your life with. It is a very powerful thing, and we realize we need to be very, very careful with that. And that is sort of the framing for this talk. It's about immersion versus intrusion. This is takeaway number 1. There's only 3 takeaways in this talk. So if you still have space in your notebook, so you're pretty much full, this will not take up that much space. But really, that is the framing for this talk. And it seems easy now in hindsight, but it's something that we really had to learn, and we really learned a few hard lessons during the development of this. Now, so the first part of this talk is going to be about sort of strengthening the immersion. And we've discovered over the course of development 4 big design pillars. The first one is making the player an active participant, not just in the gameplay, but also just in the setup of the room. And I've got this picture of the cardboard box here. And the way we're doing it in Starship is that we give you a cardboard box. The idea is that you're getting a cardboard box delivered with Starship parts, has the correct address, but the wrong planet, so Space FedEx is not taking that box back. So you get to build that spaceship yourself, and you get to place the objects wherever you want them to be placed. Now, why don't we do something like an auto setup where we, put windows on the wall and put like the biggest thing on like the empty wall that is like, the most prominent thing in your space? Well, for 2 reasons. A, the software isn't quite there, as in to tell us where's the windows, where's the floor, where's the ceiling. We get some sort of semantic information if the user has mapped them, if the system has auto-detected them. This was, when we started development, it was Quest 2, but Quest 3 and Quest 3S, they have those features now where, the system will outline windows and doors and all of that stuff. But even if that was 100% correct all the time, which is a really, really hard problem to solve, even if this was correct, we're not quite sure if this is correct for you in that moment. For example, if you are playing a mixed reality game rather than a VR game because you're waiting for a delivery and you need to be able to look out the window to check if the mailman has come, or someone has pulled into your driveway, or if you need to keep an eye out on a dog that's sleeping in a corner. We can't place things on top of real-world items that you might need to look at. And if we preset a room for you and the room is wrong, the player doesn't buy into the fantasy. So rather, we give the player a cardboard box. We tell them to put these objects in the world, and they're never in the wrong spot. So here's the cardboard box. The player walks up to it, and they get this first item. This is the helm, which is like sort of like a Star Trek style control panel / viewfinder. They place that, and then they will be getting a call from an alien that's sort of walking the player through the Starship setup. In addition to the player placing these objects themselves, and those objects therefore never being in the wrong spot, because the player decided, okay, well, I want my window here, and I want my airlock over there, we are also tracking the player while they're doing this. We are actually generating a heat map of wherever they're walking in their space, and that gives us the information of, cool, in your room, this is the safe area for us to use for gameplay. For example, if you had like a big empty wall and like a couch in front of it, we might be thinking like, oh cool, a big empty wall and a little floor space behind it would be something that we can use for gameplay. But if the player never walks there during spaceship setup, we're not using it. Because maybe there's a reason the player has never walked there. Maybe that's actually a hallway, or maybe that's actually not floor. Maybe that is just, maybe it's a staircase that wasn't detected correctly. Another thing that we can do with that information is but this is a little peek into one of our backend data structures. This is a voxel volume that we essentially pre-compute the distance to any object or the geometry in the space. So for example, if you have a table or something in the middle of the room, it'll be in there. And we calculate like a voxel substructure in it that we then can use for pathfinding. So the purple path is, for example, a pathfinding path for the robot while it's flying around the room. And pretty much everything writes into this data structure. So every object that gets placed writes into a data structure, and even the player writes into that data structure. So the object that I'm sort of moving up, that's sort of in the middle right now, that are moving into the middle of the path, that's actually our player controller. So a bot is sort of pathfinding, trying to get to a plant, but there's a player in the middle. That cell is now occupied, and the bot will stop navigating. And it will wait until that cell becomes available again, or at some point they'll just create a new path. Now that's a very simple logic, but what this actually does is quite interesting. Since plants are usually, we've seen player place them on the peripheral of their spot, there's always a good chance that the bot will pathfind through the middle of the room, where the player usually is. So from the perspective of a player, it actually looks like the bot is coming towards you, pausing in front of you, and then you sort of walk around the bot, you look at the bot, or the bot tries to find a new path, and then it goes off to somewhere else. So to the player, it kind of looks like the bot is trying to get your attention by approaching you and then going to a plant that might need care. So the player would think like, oh, this bot is just trying to get my attention to go to the plant, even though that's at all not what's happening. So involving the player in doing the room setup, in creating the space, it gives them the buy-in, but it gives also us the information on what we can do in the gameplay. The next design pillar is creating larger-than-life, logically consistent spaces. And that is the important bit, the logically consistent. There's many mixed reality games that use some sort of portals to reveal hidden geometry. I've seen games that have like a big crack in a wall and then you got like zombies coming out of it, or just like another game world behind it. And in many of those games, they have like one big central thing where like you got the game world that sits behind there. But often that game world is attached to the object that is essentially sitting on that wall, and there's some sort of mask that makes you not see that game world, only where you want them, where the aperture would be. But in our game, because we're trying to convey that there's a whole universe behind the walls, because your room takes off into space, we couldn't use that approach. Instead, we have like a really complex, expensive stencil rendering approach. And here's an example where the player is looking out the main window, and then all of these windows are freely placed. They go to another window, and they look out, and obviously you expect this same view to happen from this viewpoint as well. Now, this feels very obvious, but it's technically extremely hard to do. It's extremely expensive to do because we're essentially rendering a whole world at all times and then only making that whole world visible like through some of the stencils. And occlusion culling is really, really complex in things like this. Another thing you can notice is that there's actually several layers. On the right-hand side is an airlock. The airlock has some outside geometry that's only visible through the stencil window layer, but not visible on the actual wall itself, like the little outside shapes on that airlock. So this stuff is super hard. It also becomes extremely complicated when objects transition from inside your space to outside the space. So here we have a little lander capsule the player puts into the airlock and sort of shoots out. And you can visually track that lander capsule leaving your ship, leaving the outside of that. You can track it through one window on one wall and then through another window on another wall and actually then sort of reaching the surface of the planet. And the same way we get in the reverse, when something comes back from a planet, you can visually track it leaving the planet's surface, arriving in front of your airlock. You then bring it in, it comes into the airlock, it comes into your space. And this object actually transitions through many different layers, and there's actually many different copies of that object rendered at the same time for each of the stencil layers. And if you've ever done transparency in shaders and use stencils and stuff, we've got like 4 layers of transparency here. We've got the inside window of the airlock, the outside window of the airlock, the bot itself has like a transparent bubble on it, and then we have like particle effects everywhere as well. So this was really just like a really big technical lift from the team. But that's required, because if these objects didn't behave like this, you couldn't buy into the illusion that your room exists as a spaceship in space. This is the bare minimum you need to do to remain that, like to remain or to keep up that illusion that you're in space. Now the next point is aligning visual fidelity. So you've seen our objects already. They don't look like, sci-fi objects. If I told you that, you turn your room into a spaceship and you blast off, you wouldn't have expected this kind of art style. There's a great talk from our art director, Ashley Pinnick. There's a link to it and also her website. I'm sure if you send her an email or write her on socials, she'll be able to, give you more information about this. But in short, our art style is purposefully happy, and sort of the early 2000s, atomic purple style of material. Mostly, I think that dates our age quite well, but also because I think it's just like there's something happy and friendly about it. But more importantly, these objects don't clash with the real world. The biggest downfall of a mixed reality game is if you're trying to compare the mixed reality visuals with the real life. Because you'll always lose out. You will never be able to render photorealistic objects in mixed reality with that hardware limitation you have on a mobile platform at the moment. So here, for example, our watering can is still distinctively a watering can, but it doesn't look like any watering can that you might have in your home. So you'll never put them side by side and be like, okay, well, this one is real and that one is fake. No, this is the alien watering can, and it just looks like that. And as a side note, the shadow rendering is also quite cool that we have. We have a pre-baked shadow technique for many of the objects. Now, the other thing that you probably haven't noticed is that we actually, in addition to trying to bring the realism of the objects as high up as possible, we are bringing down the realism of the real world. And the way we're doing it is by manipulating the pass-through image. Now, on the Quest, that's fairly limited. We can essentially apply some effects and some color profiles to the pass-through image. But what you can see here is that the player here is in a star system that has like a soft orange nebula on the outside. So not only is the outside slightly orange, we are also tinting the pass-through image slightly orange, and we have a global light color in all of the objects that is now also slightly orange. And now suddenly all of these objects, they live in the same space. We're trying to push the realism of our objects up to maybe 80%. They're not photoreal, but they feel and look like 80% real. And then we take the real world that sits at 100%, and we're messing with it to bring it down to 80%. And when they meet at that same level, you don't care that they're not at 100%. The only thing that you care about is that they're now on the same level. And that's when the magic happens. That's when your brain suddenly thinks like, yep, this watering can, this window, this plant, it exists in my space. And by doing this, it's actually really crucial that we are consistent with it, and that this applies to any situation that the player is in. The moments that felt worse during development is when we had the pass-through color wrong, because suddenly it just felt like something wasn't working, even though we weren't quite able to articulate why. Another thing we can use the pass-through color in is highlight significant game events. So here in this video, just have a look at the color of the room and how that changes over time.
3, 2.
So this is from the very beginning of the game. You build your starship, you're sort of taking off. It's like you're taking off. There's a flash of light to signify that you're taking off. You're going through a cloud layer. The pass-through color changes slightly once the clouds become more yellow. And then you're jumping into hyperspace and you've got a flash of pink. And then once you're in space, it will become a different color again. And these things not only tie the game world together, but they also make it just feel otherworldly. They make it feel awesome. Another thing is that sometimes we try to hide that transition. Like, not everything needs to be that exaggerated. Here, this is from one of my favorite moments in the early game, where you're essentially traveling from being around planet Earth to another planet called Tarosat 9. That's where the scientist lives who wants that starship or needs that starship. See that place? And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to hide that transition. We're trying to draw attention to something that's out the window, so the player walks there. But notice how the color is now in the pass-through, which is that slight blue. We have then the transition into hyperspace, whereas that's sort of that moving pink. then they've arrived at Terrasat 9, and now the whole room has like this slightly greenish tone to it. So not only are we like using this for like specific gameplay moments, but also just to signify that you're somewhere else now. You're not where you started. And then I mentioned that we have dreams of plants. They're a bit more psychedelic in nature, and going with that, we actually can then dial up some of the effects that we do on the pass-through. So here we're going like super crazy with the colors. It's actually very trippy. I would not recommend playing this game under the influence, but you know. Yeah, so in dreams, we can really dial up the effects. And for example, in this dream, which is the dream of like an energy plant, we even have like an edge detection outline effect on furniture and stuff, which makes no sense as, you know, having an effect in like a normal scenario. But here it just feels otherworldly and cool. And this really just makes it that you have a mixed reality game that feels different, looks different. You're somewhere else, but you're still in your living room. But it's not your living room anymore. You've now transported into a dream of a plant, or you're orbiting around another planet. And then the last design pillar is building delightful interactions. If you haven't read this book, The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman, it's can highly recommend it. Because guess what? In mixed reality, the moment you put something in 3D space, you have now become a product designer. Because the objects that you're designing, they need to have the same affordances as real-world objects. They compete against your coffee mug. They compete against your kettle, right? And in Starship, the way we're doing this is like we have these objects, and we realized the worst objects we had in the beginning of the game, and I have some slides later for those, the worst objects were the ones that were just decorative, that don't do anything. No, if you have an object that we give you in your space, it needs to be delightful to use. It needs to be interactive. It needs to be fun. And when we sort of try to find a design language and a sort of an input modality for all our objects, we sort of landed on like really oversized handles, like really exaggerated actions. So for example, this is the airlock, and it's not a touchscreen where you just like you open the airlock and it just like opens itself. No, it's more like a big hatch. It's more like a submarine, right? It's like these big mechanical elements, and all our buttons are, or most of our buttons are like big push buttons with a really satisfying, you know, haptic effect and sound to it. It's just something that feels like that you want to play with when it's in your space. And in the same way, our plants needed to be incredibly interactive. They're after all, you know, almost the second, you know, star and hero character of our game. And we really needed to find a way to make all of these plants like squishy and gloopy. And all of the interactions with the plants, they needed to feel satisfying. If you put something in mixed reality, it's even more important that all of these things are interactive. Sometimes you have a VR game and you walk up to an object and you can't pick it up because it turns out it's actually part of a mesh and it's non-interactive, doesn't have a rigid body, has nothing. And it feels like, it's okay. Well, you realize it's a game and you move on. If you do the same thing with mixed reality, you just break the whole point of mixed reality. And we have interactions with our plants as well. Like here, we're plugging weed from a plant, and that needs to feel juicy as well. So like all the interactions we have with the plants. We support hand tracking, so we can, you know, play with some of the plants as well. They're all little characters that act differently. So like you can totally pet the dog in our game, but our dog is just a, you know, a flesh-eating, you know, plant. And that's sort of the big second takeaway. You need to design specifically for immersion, much harder than so in VR. In VR right now, if you build a gorgeous world, you get the immersion almost for free. But in mixed reality, this is much, much harder. So you need to make the player an active participant. You need to create larger than life spaces that are also logically consistent, ideally. You try to align visual fidelity. I have not seen many mixed reality games actually use the pass-through color tinting for any good effect. Like there's almost zero games that use it. And then also make all of the interactions in your game delightful. Like, and if your game isn't a delightful game, if it's a you know, a horror zombie shooter, make them realistic, make them feel heavy, make the player have an impact on that world. Now, the second part of this talk is about limiting intrusion. And again, the framing is, immersion versus intrusion. And I'm going to do this slightly different. I'm going to be talking about our gameplay systems and some of our core mechanics and how they have evolved over our development time. And they evolved not because they weren't polished in the beginning, but because we had absolutely zero idea how mixed reality should work. Our team has shipped many VR titles before, so we thought mixed reality would be like, a walk in the park for us, but really it wasn't. So I'm going to talk about our helm/control station first, which is like this big window into space that also has a control panel on it. You have character appearing on it, sort of Star Trek style. And it has many functions. And it's not something that we thought we would have in the very beginning. Because in the beginning we thought, we want to give you all of the different objects. We want to have like, here's a computer station, and here's another thing, and here's a projector thing, and here's this, and here's that. And our thinking was, the more objects, the better. Because you get to play, dress up. You get to play Animal Crossing for your room. So why wouldn't you have, 100 different items that you can place wherever you want, and it gives you the ultimate freedom. But actually, all that did was make it feel cluttered. It's almost like the cruelest joke. We give you this amazing, toy box of toys to play with, but the first thing you need to do is you need to tidy up your room, because you just don't have the space otherwise to place all of these items. So we realized that, like fewer items that are more important, that are more interesting to use, the better. If we give you only a few items that ideally sit on walls, you don't have to tidy up your space. You don't have to make space for items to place on. So we had a big main window at some point, and we added this little. It was like a mail chute we had in the beginning, and that was sort of the primary method of like receiving new items and sending out items. And we realized that was kind of cool, but more importantly, in playtesting, we found that wherever the player placed that object, they kind of assume that that is now the forward direction of your room. And I had at this point never had to think about where the forward direction of my kitchen is. But for a game where you're flying a spaceship, obviously it makes sense. It's flying somewhere, right? So that became like the forward direction. Now, in our second iteration, we realized that we kind of need like a bigger thing to receive larger items. So the mail chute became its own object, which then later on became the airlock. And we had a little control panel item that was also like a bunch of buttons, like a little display for like a computer voice to come out of. And we sort of added that to that big main window instead. And then that became our helm. Like we kind of realized, and this might seem obvious now that you've seen all the other videos, but like really the idea of having this one object that is like, here is my starship, here's my forward direction, here's how I control it, it has all the functions in it. It feels obvious, but it took us quite a while to get there. And it also goes somewhat intuitively against the thing I just said like 2 seconds ago, is that you want, objects that don't take up that much space. Because this thing is now really big. And it's not only is it big on your wall, but it also protrudes a little bit. But we realized that if you have to have them somewhere, usually having them near a wall is preferential, because it sort of condenses the space that we need. Another thing that we have is that some of our objects, they're holograms. So for example, when we open the star chart or the planet scanner, they appear in the middle of your space. So they're not there the whole time. They actually appear whenever you need them, and they disappear whenever you don't. So they're not imposing and intruding on your space, and they're not taking up too much space. Now, another thing you'll be able to see once the player has sort of selected that planet is that there's a storage chamber in the floor. They pull that out, and there's a lot more items that they can get from that that sits inside the store, inside the floor. And that way, we have a way to give the player more items without actually taking up space in your room.
And you'll have my ship back in no time.
Now, the other thing you might have noticed is that the hologram of the star chart was in the middle of the room. And that's actually no coincidence where it is. Because at the very beginning of the game, the way you get that box is by you receive a little locator, and you've been told to put that locator beacon in an empty place on your floor, and that's where you get the box delivered to. Now we know that this is an empty place on your floor. So without ever telling us, the player has now set also the position of the holograms. We can place the hologram there, and by looking at our voxel data structure, we can also dynamically scale that hologram. So if that place is very small, you get like a little hologram. If you have like a big room, you get a really big hologram, and you can be inside of it. And that really allows us to make this game playable in all sorts of weird places. One of our playtesters, when we told them, hey, can you try some weird rooms in your house? They played the game in their shower. I don't think it was like a brilliant experience, but it was fully workable inside their shower. Or maybe they have got a massive shower. I don't know. But anyways, like our game sort of dynamically scales to those spaces. Here's another one. We have the this is the planet scanner. It's a bit Mass Effect style, where you're sort of trying to find something on the planet. And here we find a landing coordinate. And the player is grabbing this lander capsule. They put it in the airlock. And you've seen this from the previous clip. And they send this lander capsule down. And this lander capsule then transmits a live feed back to the ship. So that's our way of having away missions where the player is on the surface of the planet, without actually putting them into a full VR environment, and also more importantly for our development time, without us having to create a full VR environment for 7, 8 different planets. Now, these away missions lead me to the ideas behind them, which are in the beginning, we always wanted to have the player to explore other planets. So in the very beginning, we had like this little station where it was almost like a LiDAR live view of a rover on the surface, and it would be like a point cloud, and you'd be driving through the environment, and you'd be trying to locate the plants. It was kind of cool conceptually, had 2 problems. Every planet looked the same because every LiDAR point cloud kind of looks the same. And then also, because it was smooth locomotion, we made players motion sick. And the closer they got to the screen, the more motion sick they got, because now effectively we are taking over all their field of vision and we're turning that thing into a VR game again. We didn't like this approach, so in the second iteration, we split out those 2 mechanics, like the navigation. It became almost like a top-down, like hex grid type of like mini game where you sort of navigate the rover around a more sort of data-driven representation of the landscape, and a separate plant retrieval step. And we kind of realized that, well, we want to explore other planets, we don't want to play, a hex grid type game. So we focused more on the idea of like, cool, well, maybe you just land on a planet, you're already there where you need to be, and you just collect the plants. And we really like this. The thing on the right almost looks like a little bit of an incubator where you sort of stick your hands in and you can sort of manipulate. And it became this idea here. We already had this big window in our game. What if that became the view screen for the data feed? And then you have these little robot arms that you can grab in front of you, and then they become the robot arms that you're sort of piloting outside the ship, and then you can retrieve items. Here we are retrieving the dream box that you later on need to use to dream with the plants. Now, this felt like a winner, some IK issues aside. But the problem was that once we started building more planets and more planet surfaces, we realized that you're actually very limited in what you can do on the surface with just having 2 grabber arms. And every sort of mini game that we had of like plant retrieval just became almost trivial. Like we had some really cool ideas for like, okay, well, maybe we need to grab some stones and there's like a little seesaw type of thing. But the more intricate these puzzles became, the more we realized that, playtesters are never looking at the environment. They're only looking as far as their arms can reach. Anything in the background doesn't matter, anything in the skybox doesn't matter, anything right in front of them doesn't matter too much. Effectively, we flipped the incentive. Instead of exploring this alien planet, now it became, how fast can I solve this puzzle? And all the art that our artists put in creating these amazing planets, no one noticed anymore. So we ended up doing something different. We had a concept of scanning. And so this allowed us to slow down the gameplay a little bit and focus on the exploration element. So you have this little scanner dish, and you point your scanner ray onto predefined points of interest. And we can scan them, and the information pops up. It gives us more time to world build. There's more information. And then combined with characters, we can actually have characters talking to you while you're scanning things. So here we have Jeff, who crash landed on this planet, who's the original inventor of that Dreambox device type of thing. And he's sort of talking to you while you're scanning things, and like you're scanning like, the escape pod from his ship, and he's scanning his wreckage. And don't worry, Jeff's fine, like a space, space tow truck will pick him up and stuff. But that really allowed us to tell more narrative while you're never leaving the room. It really felt like you're exploring some planet without being there. But we still wanted the player to have that feeling to be on the surface. But we couldn't model the surface of a planet. We couldn't put them in a full VR experience. And that's kind of where the dreams came into place as well. So the player puts a sick plant onto the dream box, a little bubble appears, they pop the bubble, and then they enter the dreams of that plant. And really, our dreams are like Away Mission Part 2. Like they are in interpretation of what the planet surface would look like to that plant who lives on that planet's surface. So for example, we have an eyeball plant, and this eyeball plant, in the stream, there's like a mother eyeball plant and it needs to get watered. Now we were thinking, like, well, if you're an eyeball plant, what is rain for an eyeball plant? So for an eyeball plant, rain is just other eyeball plants crying. So we get really trippy, we get really crazy in these dreams, but we can tell like a story of what that plant's inner feelings are on that planet. We can also do some really crazy stuff with mixed reality. Here in this dream, you're a light plant. You have like a little flashlight on your hands, and you can sort of shine light onto plants. The idea is that on the planet's surface, there's like really deep ravines, so there isn't really much sunlight that falls into it. But there are plants at the ridges that sort of soak up the sunlight and then shine light onto plants, onto little seedlings on the ravine's floor, and that helps them grow. And that's what you're kind of doing in this dream as well. But the way to get into dreams was also something that we had to figure out. Like this dream bubble is kind of cool. We had this idea. This idea I love, but it was so hard to teach the player. You have this little dream box. You have a little cord that you can pull out, and you can kind of just stick it in your head. And now you're like tethered to this dream box with like a fun little cable. I love this idea so much. It was like impossible to teach players that there's a headphone jack in your forehead. But yeah, the other thing that we had is we had a problem with our characters, right? You've seen characters now being like this little bubble on the view screen, but in the beginning we didn't have those characters. In the beginning, a lot of the narrative came from the starship itself. We also had a different narrative where the starship was more like, you were actually in that starship that Jeff had crash landed, so your starship was kind of broken, and the starship was the one giving you the exposition, being the sentient character in it. And the starship was like this little eye in the control panel, and it would talk to you. It would be kind of glitchy. Now you have this thing that is essentially like all over your house, all over your room, and it's an AI robotic voice. It's slightly glitchy and it has a glowing red eye. Every player thought the starship is going to kill them at some point. It is threatening in a way, threatening in a way that Ella was to River in the very beginning. It's like there's something very unsettling about being on the inside of a machine that is broken. Now, we then split out the starship into another character. So we had the starship, which was slightly less sentient, and a robot which didn't talk. It could only make some sounds. And this is the one that River really liked in the end. The problem was, I think, with the design of Ella, we overpromised what we could deliver. Players and River loved Ella so much that they wanted now the whole story being told by Ella. like Ella became their best bud. They wanted to, grab her hands and dance with her. They wanted essentially Ella to be your sidekick. And we couldn't do that. And I know we had many design discussions about Ella and that we have to remove Ella from the game. And I was fighting really hard against removing Ella from the game because it kind of felt like I'm killing my kid's dog. Like this is my kid's best friend, and how can we remove her from the game? So unfortunately, though, Ella needed to get a lobotomy, and she became this character, which I had an internal code name for. This character now is called BOT, which is also an acronym, Botanical Orbital Transporter. But my internal code name, when I sort of redesigned her with one of the writers, was Priya. Plant retrieval something automaton. But I never actually shared this code name with anyone of the team because it had the same issue. The moment you give something a name, you love it, no matter what, no matter how stupid it looks, right? Like, so it was only ever bot, and the player only ever knows it as bot. And but bot does all of the things that we needed it to do. You can stick a plant into its little goopy bubble, and it transports the plant from one part, to the other part, and it retrieves the plant from the planet. But we were still lacking a character that can talk to you. And we didn't want something that lives in your ship. Ella didn't work. We didn't want it to be the Starship. So we introduced these characters. These characters are essentially, they're sort of 2.5D characters. They live on the view screen. They have a little bit of depth to them. Actually, let me just go back on that slide. Yeah, and they can sort of emote. They have a large version of them, and they have a small version of them. The large version is when they're delivering exposition. The small version is when they're just chatting with you while you're doing other things, like being on the planet's surface. And they have like a 3D background to them as well. But the important thing is that they only ever appear when they're story elements. They don't live in your ship. They're not your best buds. They are a video call that you need to accept. But there's also some cool possibilities for narratives. Here we have Jeff talking to the player, and there's the Dreambox, which is a device that Jeff has built. Jeff is kind of like the inventor character. And the Dreambox doesn't have an AI like the ship has, so Jeff has just put some temp voice recordings into it so it can talk to the player. So here we have Jeff and Dreambox Jeff talking to each other.
It's still a prototype, but if it works, it could actually heal plants of the blight, and maybe entire planets.
Hi, I'm a highly untested Dreambox prototype. Put a plant on me to experience its subconsciousness.
Oh my, please forgive my temp voice work. This is most embarrassing.
So in that way, we're kind of establishing that this Dreambox can talk and it can deliver you information, but it's not a sentient being. And that's helpful later on towards the end of the game, where you get kind of cut off from everyone else and you're like on your own. But then the Dreambox itself can provide some further guidance. Our plants are also incredible characters, and they're fairly complex. We have an incredibly complex plant system. They have the inner life. They get interested by things. They get bored by things. And we also have things like this, which is the tentacle plant. Oh, I can't get the video to play. Cool. In any case, you can see that the tentacle plant itself, it has some stats. And if I go back to the previous slide, oops. We can see that there's like a happiness meter, there's like a water meter for fertilizer and for fertilizer. And our plants, they're incredibly interactive as well. Now, I just want to put all of this together in the very end. The plants, they actually needed to interact the same way a real-life plant would also interact. So if you can water something, there's water particles. You water the plant, there's water particles. And here's kind of bringing it all together. It's like
This isn't right at all.
last important video before the end.
It looks like
So we have, the plant being interactive. We have a character chiming in. We have the pass-through color being like the screen tone. But then something's happening now. You're inviting the video call in. We're not intruding while you're doing something else. the partial color is changing, the scary things is changing, the scary things are happening outside of your ship. And then you get a, another video call.
Oh no! Quickly! The starship! Can you realign the polarity?
The bot is pathfinding towards the window to give it a slight, it's like, oh, the bot is like talking or seeing that there's something happening, which also draws attention to the outside. And that's sort of the end of it. And yeah, the last big takeaway is you need to limit intrusion in mixed reality. You need to respect the environment. You need to focus on a smaller subset of fun objects. You need to expand the gameplay, ideally outside the room, not onto the inside, because the player might not have the space, even in mixed reality. And your story and interaction, they need to be controlled by player interactions. They might be doing something fun and they're just chilling out with the plants, and you don't want to interrupt at that point. Now, and that brings me to my last slide, the summary. For a really good mixed reality game, you need to involve the player. And involving the player, that brings out the magic. It feels incredibly when you can pull it off. Like, we are probably one of like 2 or 3 narrative adventure games or narrative games in mixed reality, period, because it's extremely hard to do. But when you pull it off, it feels amazing. I can only describe it to the first time I tried VR and I felt, that immersion into another world. That's the same feeling I had again when working and then playing Starship Home. And just to finish up, like in VR, we've always been trying to transport players to other worlds. But in mixed reality, when done right, we can finally bring those other worlds back to the player. Thank you. Cool, yeah, and I'm always happy to share anything about our game, VR, or mixed reality in general. You can email me, find me on socials. And yeah, thank you for coming. Thanks.